Clearly, the markets are opening up and the forces of economic liberalization and globalization are underway. These are forces that are relentless, forces that are irreversible. And now that India is a signatory to the WTO agreement, there is no economic activity in the country which will remain unaffected. Surely, the biggest challenge will be faced by the small and medium enterprises, or SMEs. That's because they are far more vulnerable.
Small and medium enterprises are vulnerable and threatened not because of their size, but because of the isolation. Every firm, in order to be competitive, does require specialized services, whether they are in the field of designing, training, expertise, which are very specialized in nature. And since all these services are not available within the small firm, therefore they have this problem of competitiveness.
So what can be done to reduce this isolation so that SMEs can compete on a global footing? The United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO for short, has been exploring an innovative approach in order to achieve this objective. The UNIDO Cluster Development Approach draws inspiration from the fact that successful SMEs offering a specific product or service normally operate in clusters. In other words, they're located in one geographical area. This clustering increases their competitive strength. Operating within a cluster, SMEs have several advantages. They have easier access to machinery and raw materials because the cluster itself attracts suppliers of these products. Workers with sector-specific skills flock to clusters as there are adequate employment opportunities. Transport operators too gather in such areas because there is a lot of movement of goods. Buyers also find it advantageous to approach clusters rather than isolated firms. Significantly, they provide a constant feedback to the SMEs, and as a result, these enterprises have a better grasp of consumer needs and trends. The leather, jewelry and textile clusters in northern and central Italy are examples of vibrant clusters, as is the Silicon Valley in the United States.
But then these successful clusters are not a monopoly of only the developed world. They are also there in the developing countries. Let us take the example of Chile for woodworking, or for that matter Tirupur in India, which is a famous cluster for textiles.
A UNIDO study revealed that in India there are around 350 urban small-scale industrial clusters and 2,000 rural artisan ones. All in all, these clusters contribute as much as 35% of the Indian manufacturing exports. This figure may seem impressive, but it must be stressed that only a few clusters are really dynamic. The Tirupur cluster is one of them. The small town of Tirupur in South India is home to one of the most dynamic SME clusters of the world. It produces cotton hosiery products like t-shirts, sweatshirts, sportswear and children's garments. There are more than 7,000 units here and they employ over 250,000 men and women. Impressively, around 80% of the cotton hosiery exported from India comes from this cluster alone. In 1999, the Tirupur cluster exported hosiery worth $650 million to very demanding markets in Japan, USA and Europe. So what explains the phenomenal success of the Tirupur cluster?
The phenomenal success of Tirupur is often attributed to various factors, which are logical. It is demanding markets that they are linked to. It is easier access to the capital. It is high level of technology standards that they have adopted. It is very good quality standards that they have. But none of these factors could have taken place in case of Tirupur without an element of trust and cooperation, which is the underlying cause. And this is exactly what defines the success of Tirupur cluster and many other dynamic clusters.
In Tirupur, there is ample evidence of entrepreneurs collaborating with each other and initiating a number of collective ventures. The India Knitwear Pavilion is one of them. There are around 250 stalls here, and during fairs, firms get a good opportunity to showcase their products. As a result, the pavilion has helped entrepreneurs interact directly with buyers from abroad and negotiate deals in Tirupur itself. This pavilion was set up by the Tirupur Exporters Association that has put up half the money for the project.
If you want to conduct a fair individually, it is not possible. You have to have a collection of people or a number of people. But as an association, we can easily do it. So the people believes that once association brings out a project, it is for everybody. It's not for any president or for the office bearers. So that belief they have, that trust they have.
This inland container freight station is another case in point. Once again, the capital required for this container station was raised by the association itself. This was a daunting task considering that it is spread over an area of 3.2 acres and can load as well as unload 12 containers at a time. This has helped the cluster eliminate pilferage of export cargo, minimize wrong dispatches and reduce delays. The dispatch system now works more efficiently because the association has managed to persuade the government to post some custom officials here. As a result, all the formalities related to customs are cleared in Tirupur itself. However, getting the permission from the government was not all that easy.
Through our association, we moved the central government, and after struggle, persuasion and all that, we were able to get it over a period of time.
It is evident that mutual trust amongst entrepreneurs has given them a great deal of leverage. As a result, other important cluster members like banks, financial institutions and other specialist service providers have been collaborating with the Tirupur entrepreneurs. This has allowed the cluster to initiate other ambitious collective projects like the common effluent treatment plants, a sprawling industrial estate and a well-equipped Institute of Fashion Technology. However, most of the other clusters in India are not as dynamic as the Tirupur one. What really can be done to revitalize such clusters?
The problems of the underachieving clusters is a low level of trust and cooperation. And if this can be removed by a series of systematic measures, then the cluster will become dynamic and successful. We have developed a systematic cluster development approach which has certain key components. As a first step of the cluster development approach, we need to understand what the real needs are. This is done with the help of a diagnostic study. And this is not yet another conventional study of a depressed area to understand what the problems are. This is a very participatory kind of a study where the people themselves are involved to understand the gaps and what needs to be done. After the diagnostic study, we try and assess the hidden potential of the cluster given the current market situation and the aspiration level of the key actors. In order to realize this potential, we need an action plan. The action plan is not ours, it is of the people themselves, and we help them to draft it. The initiatives which are a part of the action plan are not ad hoc and random measures. These are those initiatives which help to realize the potential. In order to implement the various initiatives which are a part of the action plan, we need vehicles, local vehicles, such as industry associations, self-help groups, consortia and cooperatives. And in many cases, these vehicles may be missing, so we may have to create them. Implementation of one action plan is not sufficient. What is required is the capacity building of various institutions and other cluster actors to be able to take up more complex initiatives as a part of the action plan. And UNIDO does not provide direct assistance to individual firms as a part of capacity building exercise, nor does it provide financial resources as the only thing to the various cluster actors. What it essentially does is that with the complexity of the initiatives increasing, the hand-holding which is required by UNIDO to help the various cluster actors network among themselves and to utilize their own resources in a more effective fashion is the end result that we tend to achieve through the capacity building process. Sustainability is an inbuilt component of all the actions which are undertaken as a part of cluster development approach. When the individual institutions and their ability to network with others to respond to the new challenges has been achieved, that is the signature of the sustainability of the cluster having been achieved. In other words, the cluster has the potential to respond to the new challenges and cope with them even long after UNIDO has withdrawn.
Walking through the narrow lanes in the old part of Ludhiana is quite an experience. There are signs of industrial activity everywhere, and knitwear is one of the key products. The 100-year-old Ludhiana knitwear cluster has its roots in these older parts of the city. Many units have also come up in the newer areas. Some, like this one, have well-organized shop floors and state-of-the-art technology. Others continue operating at a much smaller scale. All in all, there are around 10,000 SMEs in Ludhiana employing well over 250,000 people. UNIDO started its cluster development program in Ludhiana in 1997 with a diagnostic study.
The diagnostic study of Ludhiana showed very clearly that Ludhiana is a primary producer for low value added items, catering to the lower end of the domestic market. And this is primarily because of the cheap labor. And that particular advantage was also being overrun because of the entry of China and Nepal coming to India and entering into the global market.
As it so happened, the cluster members were finding it difficult to come to grips with the situation.
Their associations were very weak. In fact, the associations did not do any developmental activities and only went into requesting for tax cuts and subsidies. And this is what led to very poor linkages with the institutions also. There was a very high degree of mistrust among the entrepreneurs.
ऐसा है, पहले जो माहौल था यहाँ मैन्युफैक्चरर जो हैं आपस में कभी मिलके कम ही बैठते थे.
The mistrust was somebody will pinch my master, somebody will pinch my worker. That type of a mistrust was there.
Despite all these problems that were identified by the diagnostic study, there was a positive outlook too. What also emerged was that the Ludhiana cluster had the potential to achieve international competitiveness and to increase its share in the national market.
Realization of the potential of a cluster requires an external catalyst, namely the cluster development agent, who brings about the various cluster actors around an agreed common action plan. But this in turn requires breaking down the isolation, and this can only be done through building trust.
Sustained efforts by UNIDO led to the formation of a new association called the Apparel Exporters Association of Ludhiana, or APEAL for short. This was significant because the exporters did not have any organization to look after their needs and interests, particularly in the changing global scenario.
We thought it was a good idea to take the entrepreneurs of Ludhiana to the other clusters in Europe as well as the one in Tirupur. And I must say the entire costs were borne by the entrepreneurs themselves. By this way, they could have the opportunity to see how the actors in the other clusters had solved collectively their own problems.
At the individual level too, these trips were to be an eye-opener.
Actually क्या है कि आगे हम कंपैरिजन नहीं कर पाते थे, हम क्या कर रहे हैं, कैसे सोचते हैं. यहाँ पे एक कंपैरिजन जो है, मतलब चाहे वो कस्टमर्स के साथ था, चाहे वो डिजाइनर के साथ था या यूनिट्स के साथ, वो कंपैरेटिव स्टडी जो है वो हमें मतलब देखने सुनने को मिली.
हमें बाहर जाके देखने को मिला भी हम जो काम कर रहे हैं वो बाहर हमसे ज़्यादा बेहतर कर रहे हैं, इसीलिए हमें भी सोच हमारी भी इस तरफ आई कि हम क्यों नहीं कर सकते, जबकि हम बहुत अच्छा कर सकते हैं.
Capacity building is in fact another crucial component of the UNIDO cluster development approach. UNIDO has helped the entrepreneurs to participate in workshops and training programs on skill and technology upgradation, production design and quality management, information technology, financial management, as well as brand building and marketing. The entrepreneurs invariably contribute towards organizing these training programs. Financial and technical support is also frequently drawn from Indian institutions operating in the field of SME support like SIDBI or the Small Industries Development Bank of India. It must be emphasized that capacity building can be effective only if it is need-based. For instance, the Ludhiana cluster was found to be suffering from a shortage of trained and skilled workers. How then could such a problem be addressed?
In such a situation, we always believe that there is need to draw upon the local resources. In this specific situation of Ludhiana, there was a government polytechnic for women which had all the resources required to take care of the problems of the labor shortages. But they were not simply being utilized. This is because the entrepreneurs and the government polytechnic for women simply did not know each other. There were no linkages.
Unless we know the requirement of the industry, we can't impart the training to the students accordingly. When we know exactly the need of the industry, only then we can mold our curriculum, etc., and accordingly we can build up the gap.
UNIDO helped to bridge this gap by bringing Appeal and the Polytechnic together. What resulted was an innovative program for training women workers at the same institution. This program is clearly need-based because the Appeal members have themselves given suggestions about the exact skills that they would require from their workers.
The entire curriculum was laid down by the team of the member, and the program was laid down from day one. On day one, this would be the syllabus. On day two, this would be the syllabus. On 3, this would be the syllabus. So this was something like a 30 days program, which would be duplicated over 60 days or 90 days as per the need. This project was actually designed by the industry and run by the industry.
Appeal has also provided the equipment for the training program. Finding strength in this partnership between industry and the Polytechnic, the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India has endorsed this training program by providing financial support.
In this particular program, what has happened is that the industry has participated not only financially but also technologically. They have provided the equipment, they have provided the machinery. And what happens that when the industry participates, there is a periodical upgradation of the skills so that the workers are ever ready to face the new technological challenges. So that is why I say that this program has better chances of being sustainable and a stable program.
Significantly, all the women undergoing this 3-month course come from a poor background. Around 100 of them have picked up skills here, and all have been absorbed by the industry. This training program is a clear example of what entrepreneurs can achieve when they start trusting each other and collaborating. This would simply have been impossible a few years ago.
Nobody was talking to each other freely. It has started a little bit now with more of UNIDO's interaction. We are more open to each other. We don't mind talking about our buyers, our prices, their conduct and other things, our problems. Some of us have even started helping each other in, if I'm stuck in something, somebody is willing to help me.
The big question is whether such a turnaround in sentiment can be achieved in an artisan cluster as well. Quaint, magical, enchanting. That is how the block printing cluster in Jaipur appears at first glance. More than 350 units appear frozen in time as they continue using handcrafted blocks and mostly vegetable dyes to create colorful printed fabrics which are exported to many parts of the world. However, the UNIDO Diagnostic Study showed that not all was well with this cluster. It revealed that block printers had limited design and marketing skills. Quality control was poor, and the cluster members had limited access to credit. Importantly, linkages between the artisans, support institutions and exporters were weak. Moreover, the artisans had started facing a strong competition from screen printers. This technology was 20 times faster and made use of cheaper chemical dyes. They replicated the same designs that the hand block printers used, and only a trained eye could tell the difference.
We felt that the cluster had a tremendous amount of potential, primarily because the products were eco-friendly and the designs were rooted in the local traditions.
In the artisan cluster of Jaipur, UNIDO motivated the artisans to organize themselves into small collectives called self-help groups. These groups are managed entirely by the artisans themselves. Using the collective will as a guideline, they decide their priorities and how resources should be allocated. After all, there's a shared pool of money to be managed because every member contributes 100 rupees every month. However, it has not been easy for UNIDO to dispel the sense of mistrust amongst artisans and motivate them to get together.
When a cluster development agent goes into the cluster, the first question that people ask him is, how much money have you brought? What is the scheme? How can I get this money from you? And it's very difficult to persuade them that no, we do not have a packet of money. We are here to help you help yourself.
Despite all the initial hurdles, the self-help groups are active in ways which were unimaginable a few years ago.
ग्रुप बनाने से एक दूसरे के करीब बैठते हैं, एक दूसरे के विचार विमर्श करते हैं, एक दूसरे के धंधे के बारे में जानते हैं कि इसके पास में धंधा नहीं है तो यदि मेरे पास में ज़्यादा धंधा है तो मैं इसको थोड़ा धंधा देके इसको भी साथ ले लूँ. ये सबसे ज़्यादा प्रॉफिट समझते हैं हम अपने आप को. और जैसे आगे कोई भी चीज़ की किसी को भी कोई ज़रूरत हो उसकी हेल्प करने की कोशिश करते हैं. कोई आदमी यदि ज़्यादा एजुकेटेड है, यदि उसको हम बाहर भेजें कि मार्केटिंग करने का इसको अच्छा तजुर्बा है तो वो उसको मार्केटिंग के लिए भेजते हैं, तो हमारे को इससे मतलब धंधा बढ़ेगा हमारा.
Business is indeed beginning to flourish. For instance, recently, this group used a part of its corpus of funds to hire a stall during a crafts exhibition in Delhi.
हमारे को 30,000 का करीब प्रॉफिट हुआ है, जो हमने बैंक में अभी सुरक्षित इसलिए रख दिया कि कभी कोई जरूरत पड़ेगी तो फिर निकाल लेंगे. डिवाइड नहीं किया उस प्रॉफिट को हमने.
The high cost of credit is indeed a burden for many artisans, whether they want to upgrade their production capacities or broaden their range of products. Now, because of the self-help groups, artisans have easier access to capital from banks and financial institutions.
In case of individual borrower, the transaction cost of the bank goes up. In addition to that, the credit worthiness of the individual borrower is difficult to establish. So when they come in a group, the peer pressure works. One can support each other. One can guarantee the other's loan. So when they come in the group, it becomes easier for the financial institution and bankers to support the proposal.
In Ludhiana, the cluster development approach helped in building bridges between the entrepreneurs and the training institute. In the case of Jaipur, the same approach has brought the artisans closer to financial institutions. In Jaipur, many artisans supply block-printed fabrics to exporters. These exporters make a wide range of products like cushion covers, aprons, napkins and dresses and sell them in the international market. This linkage with a demanding market needed strengthening if the market had to grow. As in Ludhiana, UNIDO supported the exporters to get together and form a collective. This, however, was easier said than done.
same people, same business, tough competition, throat cut, so many phrases we use for competition. They meeting at one platform, sitting together, discussing. I mean, it was hard for me to swallow at that moment. But then, those were my doubts. They have been eradicated. It's a unique and a noble idea, a unique concept, and I see it flourishing day by day.
These exporters were encouraged to participate in fairs and exhibitions abroad. Here they got a chance to get a feedback on their own products as also to build up contacts.
हम लोग अकेले के तौर पर हम जाने का सोच ही नहीं सकते थे, इसीलिए हमने 3 लोग ने साथ में मिलकर जाने का सोचा और हमने कैलिको प्रिंटर्स कोऑपरेटिव सोसाइटी के नाम से हमने फ्लोरेंस फेयर में बूथ लिया। उसके बाद में फिर हम 2 दफा वहां पर जा चुके हैं। उसके बाद को हमको यूनिडो के या किसी सपोर्ट की जरूरत नहीं पड़ी। हम खुद अब वहां पर जाकर अपने उत्पाद को बेच सकते हैं। ऐसी क्षमताएं हम में विकसित हुई।
This is exactly what we had expected, that the cluster members get together and take up independent initiatives on their own. It is these kind of initiatives which indicate the sustainability of cluster development approach.
It is evident that UNIDO has helped in breaking down isolation and enhancing collaboration in the clusters of Jaipur and Ludhiana. Consequently, both clusters are better equipped to realize their potential. This cluster development approach is also being implemented in 5 other clusters in India. Everywhere, the challenges are different, but the approach is flexible enough to adapt itself to the local conditions.
It is the lessons which are important that are being drawn from the clusters that are being worked into. And these lessons are being translated into methodologies, structured methodologies, useful, professionally managed, which are then being translated into training modules to develop the cluster development agents from the government offices and institutions that are supposed to do this work.
The training programs have already begun. Officers, professionals, and industry association office bearers are absorbing the principles of the cluster development approach. These programs, which are being conducted in association with the Entrepreneurship Development Institute of India, will help them acquire the necessary skills and attitudes so that they can become effective cluster development agents.
Some states have already begun with the cluster development initiatives. Andhra Pradesh was probably the first one. This was followed by Rajasthan, which is doing its diagnostic study of 23 clusters. And very recently, government of Gujarat has allocated 50 crore rupees to develop 10 clusters on a pilot basis. I think this trend is going to continue.
The concept of cluster development, concept of change agent, concept of technology intervention, concept of capacity building is being taken up by various agents. It's not now limited to us. To that extent, our job is, shared today.
This sharing is indeed the need of the hour in the changing global scenario. After all, in most of these clusters, individual small firms are vulnerable. Only a coordinated effort by all the cluster actors, be it firms, banks, development institutions, and other service providers, will help revitalize a cluster. And for this, a trained development agent is needed to start and guide the transition of a cluster from underachievement to success. UNIDO's comprehensive approach for such cluster development agents is available to all institutions concerned with the well-being of SMEs. Indeed, this approach can be replicated in all kinds of clusters, strengthening them, energizing them, revitalizing them, and in the process helping small firms realize that the WTO regime is not a threat, but actually an opportunity.
In Rourkela, it's all about steel, machining steel, welding steel, and moving steel. Located in the Sundargarh district of Orissa is the massive Rourkela steel plant, the powerful engine of growth in this region. Clustering around this giant are a large number of small, medium and micro enterprises. These units can be divided into 3 categories. Tier 1, each with an annual turnover of more than 50 lakh rupees. Tier 2, with 10 to 50 lakh rupees, and Tier 3 with an annual turnover of less than 10 lakh rupees each. In order to accelerate the growth of this cluster, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, in partnership with the government of Orissa, initiated a cluster development program. That was in 2005.
The cluster development approach hinges largely on joint action from the producers. See, there are a lot of things in a cluster which individual producers on their own cannot do or cannot handle. The cluster approach trains people, creates platforms and helps them take joint actions towards solving their problems and sometimes exploiting the opportunities that they have.
At the outset, the program carried out a detailed diagnostic study in order to understand the kind of challenges being faced by the cluster. The diagnostic study revealed that the entrepreneurs did not have strong institutions of their own. Moreover, enterprises had weak linkages with the market, and most of the micro-enterprises had no access to formal credit. This is a typical Tier 1 machining and fabrication unit. It consumes a lot of welding wire. But of late, the entrepreneur has been able to slash procurement cost of this commodity. What he does is to team up with other fellow entrepreneurs, assess their collective requirements, and then buy in bulk. This gets them better discounts.
We thought if we buy the welding wire through core, clubbing all the requirement becomes huge. And earlier when we were getting a discount of 10 to 12%, now we are able to garner a discount of at least 30 to 35%. So that has reduced on our cost of production like anything.
This collective purchase of raw material has been possible because of CORE. CORE, or Cluster of Rourkela Engineering Enterprises, is an association of 15 Tier 1 enterprises and was formed when the cluster development program started here. However, this group formation was not easy.
Initially, it was very difficult to bring the entrepreneurs under a common platform under the cluster development program, since there was lack of trust among the units and they were competing among themselves and poaching their manpower, and there was conflicts of interest. And so it took me a lot of persuasion and efforts to bring the entrepreneurs under a common platform.
One initiative of the program was particularly useful in getting the entrepreneurs to come together.
One of the first thing we did for the Tier 1 units was to organize an exposure visit to the vibrant cluster of engineering and fabrication in Trichy.
We got an opportunity to study the growth of clusters in engineering sector in the city of Trichy. We made a visit and we understood the advantages that they were getting out of being organized into a cluster. So that encouraged us to get united. We were not so united earlier.
Formation of CORE led to several productive initiatives. Buying discounted welding wires of high quality was one. Getting ISO 9000 certification was another.
Rourkela steel departments who are ISO 9000 certified, and for supply of spares and equipments to these departments, they wanted the vendors also to be ISO 9000 certified. This is when UNIDO program came into the picture, and they advised us, and especially to all the core members, which was felicitated by UNIDO program, that they will organize a consultant who will come and guide us and advise us as to how to get the ISO 9000 certificate. And that is how all of us got the ISO 9000 certificate, which has really helped us.
As many as 25 enterprises came together and hired a common consultant. This allowed them to share all the expenses involved in getting the certification. Collaboration works. In another initiative, several core members have joined hands and are taking large orders. Jagdeep Channe of Mansarovar Industries is a part of one such group.
After formation of core, we 4 individuals have joined hands together to take up huge projects. Individually, it was not possible for us to take up these kind of projects. Now further, we are increasing our capacity to cater to the sale and many other projects of Vedanta.
Another important core event was a visit to the International Trade Fair in Canton in China.
After we visited Canton, we found a lot of plant and machineries were exhibited there. So many people collected many data, and now they are in the process of procuring those machines from China, which are almost half the cost as they are available in India.
And now, CORE is planning to set up a common facilities center for its members.
Members of CORE has applied for Common Facility Center, and we have got a grant from government.
When we started discussing about our Common Facilities Center in CORE 2 years back, we thought we will probably be able to only organize our carbon dioxide tanks. But over the couple of last 2 years, we have been able to extend the possibilities of using the Common Facility Center for several other processes which can be jointly organized for the members of CORE. Some of the processes are for skill upgradation, for calling guest speakers, for safety training, for setting up a common machining center, for common procurement of hardware.
Clearly, because of the program, there has been a sea change in the mindsets of the entrepreneurs.
CORE has given us a platform to know each other much better than what we used to know them earlier. And now that we know each other so well, the help, whether it is professional or personal, comes through very easily. Suppose I want to use the machine of another CORE member, he welcomes me, he helps me, which was missing earlier.
The diagnostic study had shown that Tier 2 units were handicapped by lots of spare capacity. They were dependent on only a few customers and had a very limited market exposure. Moreover, they were limited by their smallness.
One of the major drawbacks of the micro and small entrepreneurs of Roorkela engineering cluster is the lack of confidence to take up bigger orders individually. UNIDO under the cluster development program facilitated in formation of groups and approached the bigger units for orders.
5 Tier 2 units came together to form the Roorkela Mechanical Consortium. It had a seed capital of 1 lakh rupees.
After that, we have made a planning and programming to make a visit to the big organizations, SEPCO, then Vedanta, then Bhushan Steel Private Limited. After that, after approaching, we have got a very good orders from them. We have executed in a very short periods, and we have got a very good profitability. Even though my personal turnover has gone up more than 200% within a very short period of 1 financial years.
The question remains, why were they not getting such big orders earlier?
Before formation of the consortiums, we are also doing our own individual businesses. We are approaching different organizations in our individual capability, and they are giving less importance to us because they don't know having the confidence among us. When we approach it in a group, automatically they have created confidence among us and they have placed in orders.
As a result of this initiative, these enterprises now have more work. Capacity is being better utilized and workers are earning more. The story is almost similar with the much smaller Tier 3 units. The problem these enterprises faced was that they were operating largely in the informal economy. For instance, none of the units had sales tax registration numbers. And this is where the Cluster Development Program played a critical hand-holding role. It helped them get in touch with a chartered accountant who they hired on a cost-sharing basis. Sunil Keshri, the chartered accountant, recalls how he helped them.
These micro enterprises had their problems. The large enterprises were reluctant to give them order because they were not registered with the cell tax department. In such circumstances, UNIDO introduced me with these small enterprises and I assisted them the documentation part and to get them registered with the cell tax department.
Ever since then, orders have been coming in regularly.
Cluster development program through re ame first SEPCO golu SEPCO ro seta gote bodo company au semane amku introduce program जरिया रे करागला तापरे ने आसिले हमर फैसिलिटीज देखिले देखि साला परे ट्रायल ऑर्डर देले तापरे रेगुलर ऑर्डर देले।
Another major problem faced by the Tier 3 enterprises was the lack of credit.
No financial institution was coming forward to provide loan to micro enterprises, individual micro enterprises. So we approached a microfinance institution called BISWA and asked them to loan these small micro enterprises. BISWA agreed to finance the small units provided they form into groups of 5 JLG joint liability groups.
Entrepreneurs got together and formed 5-member joint liability groups. Only then were they able to get access to credit.
जिंदगी में हम लोग का लोन नहीं लिए थे और जैसे प्रोग्राम शुरू हुआ हम लोग को 5 आदमी मिलकर एक तो JLG 5 ग्रुप बनाया तो विश्वास से जाकर हम विश्वास से बोले हम लोग का JLG 5 ग्रुप बना दिया हम लोग को कुछ मदद करिए वो विश्वास हम लोग को 2.5 लाख रुपया मदद किए हैं। इसे हम मशीन लिए एक तो जमी थोड़ा एक्सपेंशन कर रहे हैं हम लोग का फैक्ट्री को एक्सपेंशन कर रहे हैं और हम लोग का प्रोडक्ट भी बढ़ा रहे हैं।
Meanwhile, a larger number of Tier 3 entrepreneurs have come together and formed the Rourkela Technopark Self-Help Cooperative Limited. The organization has allowed members to access more loans from microfinance institutions. As a part of the cluster development program, the Technopark Group has also taken steps to address the shortage of skilled manpower. Young men can now go through a 6-month in-plant training program and then get absorbed in the enterprises. Member entrepreneurs who let their machines be used for training are given 500 rupees per trainee per month.
This in-plant skill development training program is partly funded by UNIDO and is being implemented by Government Industrial Training Institute and Technopark Society.
The cluster development program has also helped entrepreneurs absorb new technologies. For instance, many entrepreneurs have invested in state-of-the-art welding machines.
As part of the program, we organized seminars and demonstrations on new welding technologies and invited sales and service personnel of welding technology and entrepreneurs to the demonstration new welding technologies. Demonstration of new welding technology. Most of the entrepreneurs have now adopted the latest welding technology in the cluster.
Introducing new technologies, building institutions, facilitating access to credit, buying consumables in bulk, strengthening market linkages, executing big orders collectively. A unique feature of the cluster development approach is that it deals with the entire value chain. That's because it believes strongly that it is value chains and A unique feature of the cluster development approach is not individual firms that compete in the market. And facilitating positive changes along this chain is an important professional, the cluster development agent.
Agent is a cluster who has been trained extensively in the art and science of cluster development. The agent is able to identify the critical bottlenecks facing the cluster, and then by inducing collaboration between various producers and various other cluster actors, he or she is able to find solutions to those critical bottlenecks.
So what makes for a successful cluster development agent or CDA?
CDA also has to have big ears, somebody who's willing to listen, somebody who's willing to understand the issues, somebody who's willing to go out to those steps of the people and pick up the real constraints that they face. Cluster development agent may or may not be a subject expert. For example, in a weaving cluster, it is not essential that the CDA is an expert in weaving or in dyeing. But what a CDA essentially specializes in is the ability to locate solutions and bring those solutions through networking to the cluster.
Interacting constantly with the entrepreneurs and often drawn from the community is the network development agent.
Quite often the clusters that we work in are widely spread, either over few villages or over few industrial areas. In such cases, it's not feasible for a CDA to be in touch with the networks, with the SHGs, with the federations on a day-to-day basis. Quite often, people from the community, boys and girls from the community, are taken in as network development agents who look after these networks, these groups, handhold them in day-to-day decisions and find solutions to critical bottlenecks.
Effective cluster development agents and network development agents can set into motion an important process of change. In Rourkela, for instance, the Rourkela Mechanical Consortium has executed orders worth 27 lakh rupees in less than 3 months. 4 Tier 1 units have received a joint order of 15 crore rupees from NALCO, while 10 Tier 3 units have come together and are executing a 20 lakh Vedanta order. Together and are executing a 20 lakh Vedanta. 3 units, 20 together Tier 1 units have got ISO 9000 certification. Clearly, the seeds of change have been planted. a pit loom, some tie and dye yarn, and lots of expert hand movements. The end result, a symphony of colors and designs. Located in western Orissa is the historic Ikat handloom cluster of Barpali. Using tie and dye yarn, weavers here produce an enchanting fabric that has a market not only in Orissa but also all over the country. Some weavers produce directly for the market. Others take up orders from master weavers who retail the products themselves. All in all, the cluster, with over 2,000 looms, has an annual production of around 7 crore rupees. However, the cluster has been facing threats. Looms are often idle and many artisans have to struggle to eke out a living. Poverty seems to have become endemic to the cluster. So, what can be done to make the cluster dynamic and reduce the level of poverty? In order to address these issues, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, in partnership with the government of Orissa, initiated a cluster development program. That was in 2005.
The cluster development approach hinges largely on joint action from the producers. See, there are a lot of things in a cluster which individual producers on their own cannot do or cannot handle. The cluster approach trains people, creates platforms and helps them take joint actions towards solving their problems and sometimes exploiting the opportunities that they have.
At the outset, the program carried out a detailed diagnostic study in order to understand the kind of challenges being faced by the cluster. The diagnostic study revealed that the weavers did not have strong institutions of their own. They faced a shortage of credit and were hampered by weak market linkages. The skills of some of the marginalized artisans needed upgradation, and the cluster had not absorbed any new technologies. Finally, communities lived in poor hygienic surroundings, and this was affecting their working lives. So how, for instance, was the shortage of credit weighing down on the weavers?
ପୁଞ୍ଜିର ଅଭାବରୁ ମାନେ ଦୋକାନକେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ଶାଢ଼ୀ ମାନେ ଦୋକାନକେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ସୂତା ରଙ୍ଗ ନେଇ ଯାଉଛୁ ସେ ନଗଦ ପଇସା ନେଇ ଦେଲେ 50-60 ଟଙ୍କା ଅଧିକା ଚାର୍ଜ କରୁଛି ଆମକୁ ଆଉ ସେ ଅଧିକା ଚାର୍ଜ କରିବାର ଲାଗି ଆମର ଲାଭଟା ହାତି କମି ଯାଉଛି ହାତି ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଯଦି ନା ଆଣିଲେ ବି ଆମର ମଙ୍ଗା ବନ୍ଦ ହେଇଯିବା ସେଥିପାଇଁ ଆମେ ବାଧ୍ୟ ତାନ ଅଧିକା ରେଟ୍ରେ 50-60 ଟଙ୍କା ଅଧିକା ରେଟ୍ରେ ଆମେ ଆନବାର ପଡ଼ୁଛି ସେଟା
ଗୁଟେ ବছର କି ଆମକୁ 4-5 ମାସ ମାନେ ଅକ୍ସିଜେନ ଏସି କପଡ଼ା ଟିକେ ବିକ୍ରି ଭଲ ହୁଏ ନା ହୁଏ ବୋଲେ ଆମେ ଯଦି କପଡ଼ା ନା ବିକୁଛୁ ଆମର ଘରର ଚଲାବାର ଅସୁବିଧା ହେସି ତାର ସାଙ୍ଗେ ସୂତା ଘିନବାର ଅସୁବିଧା ହେସି ଆମର ଯଦି ପୁଞ୍ଜି ଥିତା ସେ କପଡ଼ାକେ ଆମେ ନା ବିକି କରି ରଖି କରି ସିଜନକେ ସେଟା ବିକିତୁ ବୋଲେ ସେଟା ଯେନ୍ 50-100 ଲଗା ଗୁଟେ ପିସ୍ के कम हेसी से पैसाटा हेला हमर सब सुता घिनबार परिवार चलाबार ଟିକେ सुविधा
No financial institution was willing to lend to individual weavers. So what about the weavers' cooperatives? Sadly, they had all become defunct, which is why the program organized the weavers into self-help groups in various villages. This, however, was not easy.
Initially, when I started working with this weaver community here in Barpali itself, I took lot of time to build simply trust with this weaver because I am a totally new person to them. Secondly, to form a group, the most important thing is that the weaver has to trust each other first, because unless they trust each other, the group cannot be a strong group. So it took lot of time to build this trust among themselves also.
After some groups had emerged, it became possible to approach financial institutions.
After forming different groups of the weavers, I approached different financial sources, financial institutions like MFIs, that is BISWA, then Caste Foundation, then SDFC Bank. I gave them this concept of cluster development and I told them that we have already formed good groups in our villages and requested them to come forward to give credit to our weaver as per their own need. So these financial institutions, they came forward and they give loan, they give credit as per the business plan prepared by the weaving groups.
Loans from formal lending institutions have eased the weavers' working capital requirements.
लोन आनबार द्वारा आमर फायदा ये आमे आगो जन कम दाम रे माने साड़ी बिक्री करथनु आरो रंग सूताटा उच्चा दाम रे जन घेनुथनु लोन आनला पर आमे रंग सूता उचित दाम रे घिनिगिरी साड़ी बुनिगिरी जन कम दाम रे बिकुथनु साड़ी सेटा ना बिकिगिरी माने टाइम ऊपर आमे उचित दाम रे साड़ी बिक्री कलु और माने उचित मूल्य रे बिक्री करिगिरी आमे दि पैसा भल फायदा करि पारिगिरी यादे हमर परिवार के ठीक हिसाब आमे चले पारजु.
In many poor households, marginalized artisans are wage earners because they do not have tie and dye skills. A few of them buy tie and dye yarn directly from the market and then weave it. However, this leaves them with very little money.
बांधा में नहीं जाना का बरपाइन लोग घिने आनो जो बोले घिनवा टाइम को पड़ी जो ये बेसी पैसा आरो हमार साड़ी देखला बिली तबने बेसी लाभ पे जो ना में कम पहुँचे टी बांधा बांधा लोग बेसी लाभ पहुँचे आरो हमें तरमाना साड़ी तैयार करा लोग कम पैसा पहुँचे.
Could some of the poorer women not be trained in this art? After all, they were the ones who did most of the pre-loom activities. That's why the program selected some women from Kusanpuri to be trained in tie and dye. However, finding a trainer was not easy.
Actually, all our trainees were from the Kuli community, but this particular tie and dye skill lies with the Bulia community people only. So these Bulia community people were very much reluctant to give training to the Kuli community people. So initially we had to spend lot of time in locating a trainer who can give training to these Kuli community people.
The training sessions finally began. The program provided the trainers' fees as well as all the material. Every member of the group paid 100 rupees as fees. 6 months later, they were ready to take their tie and dye products to the market.
Actually, after the training program, the women were able to make their own tie and dye yarn. And that time we insisted them to go directly to the market and sell the product to the weavers, to the trader there, so that they can know whether they are making the right kind of product and whether their product is actually marketable or not.
हमें जेन मार्केट के गलु पहलारू तो केंदी करी बांधो बिकसन काना करसन ई सब बाबत नहीं करी हमें किछि नहीं जानते तापरे लोग माने भी हमको बहुत इटा करले हंसले बोले कि झियो माने सेन के नहीं जाउथे अब हमें पहलारू से जगह के गलु बोले झियो माने केनु बिकसन नेता सेंता बोल कर बहुत इटा कहले तापरे हमें से मानकर कथा के नहीं सुनी करी भी हमें गलु और पहलारू हमर बांधो भी बिक्री नहीं होते तापरे धीरे धीरे करी आमटा भी बिक्री है और जेन माने ही हमको हंसी थिले से माने भी आस्ते आस्ते करी हमको डिजाइन माने सिखाले जे तुम्हें एंता डिजाइन माने जदी करबो बोला मार्केट न बिक्री हवा और भल दु पैसा भी हवा बोली करी से माने निजे कहले.
Today, these Kusanpuri women have become skilled dyers. The artisans now do tie and dye at the household level, add value, and as a result, earn more.
हाँ बांधवा में आगरू जेनटा घिनिकी आनुलु से बेसी खर्चा होता तो यहाँ जिन झील मैंने निजे घर बांध करबार जानी सारिछन तो खर्चाटा सेन कमुचे आम सेन किसी लाभवान पाई पारुछन आ खर्चा सेन ना निजे करि पारुछन छुआ माने बांध सब करी शिखी करी पारुछन तो भल इम्प्रूव पाई हो आमे.
The diagnostic study had shown that the Barpali cluster continued using outdated technology. This was particularly true for all the pre-loom activities. Could productivity and quality not be improved by using better machines? In order to address this issue, the program urged weavers in Bandpalli to first come together. This led to the formation of the Bijayani Bunkar Self-Help Group.
After the group formation for technology intervention, we took our groups for the exposure visit to Pochampalli, Chirala and Varanasi. as Pochampalli is the similar cluster to our this Ikat cluster, and whereas Chirala and Varanasi is the one of the famous technology driven cluster in India.
बाहर आमे देखलु एक्चुअली फ्री लूम रे से माने जतकी मशीन टेक्नोलॉजी प्रयोग करी काम करू जान सिने बहुत कम टाइम रे बेसी फायदा करि पारु जान बेले सेटा आमे देखलु हमर किछि मुडा ढुकला बेले आमे भी फ्री लूम रे कागरी मशीन टेक्नोलॉजी प्रयोग करी आमे कागरी फायदा नै करि पारमा से चिंता हमर मुडा रे ढुकी जे.
After coming back from the trip, some weavers invested in new machines. And then the group got the idea of actually manufacturing some of them.
आज जिन मशीन आम तैयार करूँ बहुत सक्सेसफुल होइछे पाखा पाखा हम बुणाकार भाई आसुले आम मशीन देखले देखि सारा पर हमको ऑर्डर कले आम सप्लाई भी करूँ पाखा पाखा लोग सप्लाई कलु आई दिन आम 80टा मशीन सप्लाई कलु न और मध्य बहुत ऑर्डर आम पाखे बहुत अच्छी.
Artisans using these new machines have discovered that the benefits are significant.
आमे हमर मशीन रे काम करला बेलु आमे हमर टाइम केतनी पहुंचु छे आ आमे अधिका लुगा भी बुनी पारो छ आ हमर परिवार के आमे सुधरी रखी पारो छ आ हमर देहर परिश्रम जनटा कम हो छे.
Barpali. This small town is an important retail hub for Ikat products. Many master weavers operate out of Barpali. They provide designs and yarn to weavers who they pay to make the finished products. These are then marketed by the master weavers. Fragmented as they are, master weavers have had a limited marketing outreach. How then could the program link them to the more demanding national markets? At the outset, the program facilitated them into forming their own self-help group. Members of this group then visited a number of exhibitions in different cities.
प्रोग्राम माध्यम रे हमें एग्जीबिशन गलु दिल्ली जाइथिलु बॉम्बे भी गलु पुणे भी जाइथिलु तो सेनु हमें देखलु जे अलग अलग जिनिस माने अलग अलग वैरायटी रे चलु छी अलग अलग कलर माने चलु छी अलग अलग प्राइस रे भी जाउ छी तो से हिसाब रे हमें आसी गिरी से जिनिस माने हमें फिर तैयार करी गिरी हमें सेंता बाहर मार्केट की जीवाल लगी मैं जाई गिरी जिनिस फिर सेल करवार के हमर आत्मविश्वासटा अछि.
The next step for the program was to help them secure some order.
To create the national market tie-ups for the master weavers, we hired one textile designer who is expert in textile design as well as aware about the national market. She gave a series of series of samples of designs were made, which we shown to Fab India, and Fab India liked some of the designs and they placed some orders, which orders are produced by our master weavers, which is around 5 to 6 lakhs, which gave them the confidence to participate in the national market.
Fab India is one of the most successful retail outlets for handcrafted products in India. The institution, with its focus on blending indigenous craft techniques with contemporary designs, can be very demanding as far as quality standards are concerned. Working closely with their own weavers, the Barpali group was able to execute the orders successfully. This has been an enormous confidence booster for the master weavers.
Fab India का नाम तो हमें आग्रह भी नहीं सुनी जितने Fab India हमको मौका दे मिलला काम करवा लगी हमें से काम कलूं आ हमर आत्मविश्वास बढ़ला आत्मविश्वास बढ़ी करी हमें से न निजे जाई करी ऑर्डर हमें तांको आनी करी हमें निजे तांको एबे दोचू एवं देबार के हमर साहस भी रचे से मानो न हमर काम करवा लगी.
One issue that emerged in the diagnostic study was the high prevalence of illnesses in the weaving communities. Most poor families could not afford the medical treatment and the lost working days simply made it worse. This is another area that the program sought to address.
Initially, we organized different kind of health awareness camp, health camp by the reputed doctors in the area, and we also took the help of experts from home economic training centers. So these people, these experts, they came here and organized these camps, and they gave us the feedback that poor sanitation is a big problem in this area. Then the federation took a decision there to carry on the sanitation work in the village. So every month they are doing the sanitation camp in the village.
So what was this federation? As a part of its various initiatives, the program had helped to strengthen the existing women's self-help groups. This women's empowerment process was further reinforced when the groups federated to form large organizations called Maitri. One of its activities is to organize regular sanitation drives in the villages. It has also been able to use an existing government program to get sanitary latrines constructed for many villagers. Such initiatives are helping mitigate some of the chronic health problems. Addressing social issues, building institutions, facilitating credit, upgrading skills, introducing new technologies, and strengthening market linkages. A unique feature of the cluster development approach is that it deals with the entire value chain. That's because it believes strongly that it is value chains and not individual firms that compete in the market. And facilitating positive changes along this chain is an important professional, the cluster development agent or the CDA.
A cluster development agent is a change agent placed in the cluster who has been trained extensively in the art and science of cluster development. The agent is able to identify the critical bottlenecks facing the cluster, and then by inducing collaboration between various producers and various other cluster actors, he or she is able to find solutions to those critical bottlenecks.
So what makes for a successful cluster development agent or CDA?
CDA also has to have big ears, somebody who's willing to listen, somebody who's willing to understand the issues, somebody who's willing to go out to those steps of the people and pick up the real constraints that they face. Cluster development agent may or may not be a subject expert. For example, in a weaving cluster, it is not essential that the CDA is an expert in weaving or in dyeing. But what a CDA essentially specializes in is the ability to locate solutions and bring those solutions through networking to the cluster.
Interacting constantly with the artisans and often drawn from the community is the network development agent.
Quite often the clusters that we work in are widely spread, either over few villages or over few industrial areas. In such cases, it's not feasible for a CDA to be in touch with the networks, with the SHGs, with the federations on a day-to-day basis. Quite often, people from the community, boys and girls from the community, are taken in as network development agents who look after these networks, these groups, handhold them in day-to-day decisions and find solutions to critical bottlenecks.
Effective cluster development agents and network development agents can set in motion an important process of change. In the Barpali cluster, for instance, over 530 weavers have availed of credit of around 76 lakh rupees from banks and microfinance institutions. Weavers have achieved an additional sale of more than 1 crore rupees, and the average income of around 400 weavers has gone up by 400 rupees to 700 rupees per month. The cluster has installed over 200 modern machines, and this has boosted productivity and quality. Clearly, the seeds of change have been planted. It all started in the 13th century with temples like these. Exquisitely carved, these monuments are powerful reminders of the high level of craftsmanship that existed then. Thankfully, these skills are alive even today. Located around the capital of Orissa is the Bhubaneswar stone carving cluster. Production takes place either in household units or in the larger craft production centres which are owned and managed by master craftsmen. All in all, the cluster has an estimated annual turnover of 2.5 crore rupees. However, not all is well with this historic cluster. Craft units do not have work all through the year. Workers often do not get their wages, and many of the household artisans are on the brinks of poverty.
ମୁଁ पत्थर काम जानिथिले सुदा मो पारे कोनोसी पैसा पत्र नाही पत्थर आनिया पेगा मु बड़ बड़ फैक्ट्री मान को जाई जो माने पत्थर सब फिंगी दोछंती से छोट छोट पत्थर आनी निजे काम करी पाख बाजार रे बिकी मोर गुजराण मेटौची एबे मोर पैसा पत्र किछि आवश्यक पडिवारु दा छेली थिले सेगुडा को बाजार रे बिकी किछि पैसा हला एवं से पत्थर आनी एबे काम करछि एवं आगो को कोन करिवि मो पारे तो आदम पैसा पत्र नाही एवं कोन करिवि मो किछि एबे स्थिर करि पारुनी.
So what could be done to make the cluster dynamic and reduce the level of poverty? In order to address these issues, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO, in partnership with the government of Orissa, initiated a cluster development program. That was in 2005.
The cluster development approach hinges largely on joint action from the producers. See, there are a lot of things in a cluster which individual producers on their own cannot do or cannot handle. The cluster approach trains people, creates platforms and helps them take joint actions towards solving their problems and sometimes exploiting the opportunities that they have.
At the outset, the program carried out a detailed diagnostic study in order to understand the kind of challenges being faced by the cluster. The diagnostic study revealed that the artisans did not have strong institutions of their own. They faced a shortage of credit and were hampered by weak market linkages. There were artisans whose skills needed upgradation, and the cluster had not absorbed any new technologies. Before the program, master craftsmen who ran their own craft production units were fragmented. They had no result-oriented institutions of their own. And as a result, they could not overcome critical hurdles like a chronic shortage of working capital.
आगुर सारा आमर बहुत असुविधा थिला आमे भी एककालना पत्थर किनिया पे पैसा पत्र भी होनथला तेणु सीजन ऑफ सीजन रे किछि आमर नै आमे बसी रहथलु जहा फलर कि निजर परिवार चलाया पे बहुत असुविधा हमको होथला पिला पाठ पढिया रे माने निजर मेंटेनेंस पई आमे सारा बहुत असुविधार सम्मुखीन होथलु.
But why could they not get loans to tide over the immediate capital needs?
The banks were not supporting the individual units because the paperwork for getting loan of the individuals were not complete. So what we did, we approached some of the microfinance institutions who showed interest, but on one condition, that they can support only groups.
However, getting these master craftsmen to form a group was not easy.
It was very difficult to form the group of these stone carving artisans here, because there are a lot of unhealthy competition among themselves. There lack of trust among themselves. They were because the opportunity of marketing was very low. There are a lot of infighting among themselves. So I had to spend a lot of time, and I also initially I became frustrated also because I couldn't find many good results. And then slowly and gradually I persuaded them, and only a few members came forward to form a group and then start experimenting with some of the group activities.
These were the master craftsmen who set up their registered self-help cooperative in Konark, and as a result they were able to get loans from the microfinance institution.
काम जो सफिशिएंट पाउ नथलु सफिशिएंट काम भी करि पारुछु काम करा द्वारा हमर भी रोजगार भी बढ़िछि
तेणु जो वर्कर मैंने पैसा ठीक से पाई पार नथिले से माने भी पैसा ठीक से पाउछंती मोर वर्कसाइट भी मु मरामती भी करिछि आउ दुकान टे सेपट करी भाग ही करिछु ता संगे मु मोर पूंजी भी किछि खटैछि.
This is the retail outlet that Shyam Sundar Maharana was referring to. Located right near one of the main roads in Konark, this outlet is another result of the group initiative.
एक्चुअल प्रथम आम कम करूँ जेझार जे कम कर व्यवसायी मानक दौलू से मार्जिन आमको कम मिलता आम जो ग्रुप करने ये आम चिंता कलु गोटे सेल्स आउटलेट करूँ जो सेल्स आउटलेट कलु ये डायरेक्ट कस्टमर जो नेले आमको 30% मार्जिन मिलला जोटा कि डायरेक्ट आम पाक आसला मिडलमैन कहीं रही.
Another problem for craftsmen working in isolation is one of marketing. It is difficult for them to create direct linkages with more demanding markets. However, as groups, new possibilities emerge.
पूर्व तो सारे आम कम ही लोकल बेपारी मान को दौलू तर प्रोग्राम माध्यम बाहर को जो गलु जानलु जे सेंट्रल कटेज इंडस्ट्रीज कॉर्पोरेशन जो दिल्ली अच्छी से कम करुँच आम फोटोग्राफ्स आउ कि सैंपल नहीं गलु जापर से आम सैंपल को पसंद कले फोटोग्राफ देखिले तापर से कहले तुम कम दे पार आमको लगे आम गोटे ग्रुप अच्छी 10-12 जन ग्रुप अच्छी आम जिते कम देवे आम से क्वालिटर काम भी आम दे पारू तापर से आम जो कम करूँ कि नुआ कम विषय देखिलु देखा कम नहीं गलु नवापर मार्जिन भल मिलूँ से भी आम बारंबार ऑर्डर दौरान वर्ष को बहुत ऑर्डर दौरान आम नहीं दौर मार्जिन जोटा कि आम 5% पाऊँ से 40-50% पाऊँ.
The question still remains. Why did the master craftsmen not take such initiatives earlier?
आमे सेमत सुविधा के पाई नथिलु जेझार जे काम करे गोटे कारीगरंकर थिला ना के कापा गोटे जाई पार नथिलु आउ निजे खटबु निजे जाई पारु तेणु सेमिति के भाबिनु जे एमिति गोटे कले कोन सुफल मिलबो एमिति चिंता भी कर नथिलु.
In Bhubaneswar too, some master craftsmen came together and formed their own group. One of its early initiatives was an exposure visit to other stone carving clusters.
As a part of our trust building exercise, we took the members of this group, around 12 of them, to Jaipur, and in Jaipur particularly to Sikandara.
आमे जयपुर जाइथिलु सेठारे सब भल भल संस्था सब बुली देखिलु सेठारे सब कौन कर ना सब मेसिनरी यूज करी माने बढ़िया बढ़िया जिनस कम समय भितर प्रोडक्शन बाहर करछंती फेरला पर हमर जो प्रोग्राम माध्यम रे हमर गोटे सप्लाई सिंडिकेट अछि ताकू गोटे डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन पय डकैलु से माने आसी कि हमकु सब मेसिनरी बाबत डेमोन्स्ट्रेशन कले कला पर आमे जो प्रोग्राम माध्यम जो ग्रुप हे जाइथिलु जते जण तांकर जहार जा रिक्वायरमेंट जहार जा इच्छा से अनुसार मेसिन मध्य किनिलु आनला परे आमे सेटा को आनी कि हम संस्था रे यूज करलु जोटा कि देखिलु आमे कम मैन पावर रे आ शीघ्र मध्य एटा प्रोडक्शन हे पारु आ भलो क्वालिटी मध्य यूज करि होउची.
For instance, this was how artisans were cutting stone in the past, and this is how they are doing it now. Clearly, the Jaipur trip has made a lot of impact on the master craftsmen. But where did they get the capital to buy these machines? Again, since they were a part of a registered group, they could get loans from microfinance institutions. Meanwhile, there has been another important outcome of group formation. Master craftsmen have started taking much bigger orders.
ग्रुप कला पर लाभ हैला सुसंपर्क बढ़िला गोटे ऑर्डर आसला भितरे जदी ऑर्डर मो पाक अधिया पळे आसला हम काम न करबे ऑर्डर कैंसिल होतला ग्रुप होवा द्वारा बांटी काम कर देलु ऑर्डर से लोकर फिलअप हो गला से नहीं गला आ गोटे हम कारीगर मान जो माने काम करछन से कारीगर भाई माने कारीगर मान को नहीं जाउतले कि से तांका कारीगर को मु नहीं आस्तली ये होबा द्वारा आ किए का कारीगर को नौ ना सी तुम बाटे तो आम आम बाटे ता द्वारा पत्थर खणी की जदि किए गला जनकर पत्थर देखिला दिया है ऑर्डर सी देखला मो ग्रुप भाई तो सी आ से पत्थरटा को नवा कलानी कि ता द्वारा से भी बुझी दे आसला ता द्वारा हम जीवा आसवा भी सॉल्व हो गला.
Like their counterparts in Konark and Bhubaneswar, these master craftsmen in Puri have also formed their own group, and this has already translated into a powerful marketing initiative.
The master craftsmen here, they are totally depending on the local traders, and the margin was very low, less than 5% also in many cases. So we thought that we will possibly link them to some of the national buyers where they will get better margin. So what we did is we went around in the national market, then we made a list of the national buyers, particularly in Jaipur, Delhi and other big cities, and we shared this information with the group of master craftsmen here. And based on this information, they went on an exposure visit, and they also shared the samples with these national buyers, and they got linked with these national buyers, and this is continuing on.
The master craftsmen, who are now getting much better margins, are quick to acknowledge the impact of the program and the advantages of group formation.
ये प्रोग्राम माध्यम गलांगर सेमान सहित सूचना मिला अगरो सूचना नथला सेमान सहित तापरे ग्रुप माध्यम गलांगर कस्टमर मान ग्राहक सहित साहस बढ़ुच कथावार्ता कर भलो होला आउ प्रोग्राम माध्यम रे ग्रुप माध्यम रे आमे बहुत जिनस तांकर हम जोगेई पारछु एकुटिया जोटा जोगेई होनथला सेमानकर भी विश्वास आछे ना ए माने जोगेई पारिबे.
The group has now taken other initiatives to strengthen its linkages with more demanding markets.
आमे ग्रुप माध्यम रे जयपुर स्टोन मार्ट एग्जीबिशन जाइतलो सेटा भारतर सबुठु बड़ पत्थर शिल्प प्रदर्शनी सेठी गोटे ट्रक लोड जिनस नैथलु हमर आशा नथला गोटे दिन रे सब जिनस बिक्री हो बोली सेठी जो ग्राहक आसला तांकटु आमे बहुत कथा जानलु केमती डीलिंग्स करिया पड़े केमती प्राइस करिया को हुए ग्राहक मानकर डिमांड कोन आमे बहुत कथा सिखिलु.
As more master craftsmen get together and take new initiatives, there is every reason to believe that they will prosper. And along with this prosperity will come more jobs, bigger salaries and better working conditions for the employees. But what about the household artisans? Many like Dhaneshwar Biswal from Rawalpatna had been struggling. Like he mentioned earlier, he survived by working on stones discarded by the bigger units. 2 years ago, he became a part of the Cluster Development Program. Along with 4 others, he formed a joint liability group and was able to get some loan for his working capital needs.
आमे 5 जण ग्रुप होला परे काश फाउंडेशन हमको 5000 टंका लगा ऋण देले एवं से टंका को आनी बाजार रो म यथेष्ट परिमाण रे पत्थर आनिली पत्थर आनला परे किछि कारीगर मध्ये पाखर रखली एवं मते बाहर लोकंकर ऑर्डर मध्ये मिलिला एवं से ऑर्डर अनुसार आमे काम करी देला परे किछि भलो रोजगार मध्ये हला एबे संपूर्ण रूप रे रोजगार बढ़िछि एवं मोर परिस्थिति आर्थिक परिस्थिति मध्ये बदली जाइछि.
Group formation works. In Rawalpatna, it has allowed collaborating household artisans to access credit for their working capital needs. And in Nagpur village, it has helped to improve the skill levels of women. Many of the household artisans in the Stonecraft cluster are women. Usually, they are engaged in making small products that require very little skills. As a result, their incomes are among the lowest in the cluster. As a part of the Cluster Development Program, women in Nagpur have come together and formed their own self-help cooperative society. This microcredit group has even been able to organize training programs for its members. As a result, Mamta, a former trainee, is now able to add more value to her products.
ଆମର ଛୋଟ କାମ କରିଥିଲୁ କିଛି ଡିଜାଇନ୍ ନଥିଲା ସେଥିରେ ଖାଲି ରଫ୍ କାମ ଥିଲା ପ୍ଲେଟ୍ କାଟି ଦେଉଥିଲୁ ମେସିନ୍ରେ କାଟିକି ସେଲିଂ କରିଦେଉଥିଲୁ ଏ ବଡ଼ କାମ ହେଲା ବଡ଼ କାମରୁ ଆମେ ସବୁ ଶିଖିଲୁ ଡିଜାଇନ୍ ବହୁତ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ପ୍ରକାର ଡିଜାଇନ୍ ଶିଖିଲୁ ଇଞ୍ଚ ଶିଖିଲୁ ତାପରେ ଯେଉଁ ମାନେ 4 ଇଞ୍ଚା କରିବ କେତିକି ଇଞ୍ଚ ମାପ କରିକି ଆମେ ବି ଜାଣିପାରିଲୁ ମାପଟା ଜାଣିନଥିଲୁ ସେଗୁଡ଼ାକ ବି ଜାଣିଲୁ ତାପରେ ଯେଉଁ ହାତୀ ଘୋଡ଼ା ଷ୍ଟାଣ୍ଡ ସବୁ କେମିତି କେଉଁ ଜାଗାରେ ବସେ ଆମେ ଜାଣିନଥିଲୁ ସେଗୁଡ଼ାକ ବି ଜାଣିଲୁ ଏଗୁଡ଼ାକ ଏ ଷ୍ଟାଣ୍ଡରେ ଏପଟେ ବସିବ ସେଟା ଏପଟେ ବସିବ ଏଗୁଡ଼ାକ ସବୁ ଜାଣିଲୁ.
Empowered by the new skills, women have been able to increase their earnings.
छोट कामरू आमे मासुक 1200 एमती इनकम करू से किछि हमकु अंटेनी हम घर खर्च रे कुआडे लागि जाय जिंदी ट्रेनिंग पर बड़ काम कलु 2000 पर रोजगार कलु 2000 पर रोजगार कला पर आमे पिलांक खर्च कलु बही खाता ट्यूशन दरमा स्कूल दरमा तापरे एमती घर रो चावल किना सब एमती हम सब सर कलु.
One issue that emerged in the diagnostic study was the high prevalence of illnesses in the stone carving communities. Treatment was expensive for poor families, and the working days lost simply made it worse.
Like other villages in the area, the villagers here also suffer from many health-related problems. Particularly, they suffer a lot of seasonal diseases like diarrhea, dengue fever, and other skin diseases. Other than that, they also suffer from a lot of these craft-related problems like backache, like eye problems, and these are the problems. And they also don't have any health coverage for them also.
In Nagpur village, the women's group has been active in addressing some of these issues.
प्रोग्राम माध्यम हेल्थ कैंप कलु हेल्थ कैंप बाहर डॉक्टर आसिले डॉक्टर आसिक आमको किसी मेडिसिन देले चेकअप भी कले आम सब औषध नहीं कि आसलु तापर हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस है हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस आम 25,000 कैंप क्लेम पाइलु.
The group has also been able to use an existing government program to get sanitary latrines constructed for many villagers.
आगुरु आम किसी जानि नथुलु प्रोग्राम माध्यम रे किसी जानिलु सरकारंकर किसी स्कीम अछि बोली जानिला परे मेंबर पिछा 200 लेखा देलु दबा परे सरकारंक तरफरु 1200 टका लेखा पाइलु पाइबा परे समस्त गोटे गोटे लाटिन कलु सेतरु बेनिफिट हेलु.
Addressing social issues, building institutions, facilitating credit, upgrading skills, introducing new technologies, and strengthening market linkages. A unique feature of the cluster development approach is that it deals with the entire value chain. That's because it believes strongly that it is value chains and not individual firms that compete in the market. And facilitating positive changes along this chain is an important professional, the Cluster Development Agent, or the CDA.
A cluster development agent is a change agent placed in the cluster who has been trained extensively in the art and science of cluster development. The agent is able to identify the critical bottlenecks facing the cluster, and then by inducing collaboration between various producers and various other cluster actors, he or she is able to find solutions to those critical bottlenecks.
So what makes for a successful cluster development agent or CDA?
CDA also has to have big ears, somebody who is willing to listen, somebody who is willing to understand the issues, somebody who is willing to go out to those steps of the people and pick up the real constraints that they face. Cluster development agent may or may not be a subject expert. For example, in a weaving cluster, it is not essential that the CDA is an expert in weaving or in dyeing. But what a CDA essentially specializes in is the ability to locate solutions and bring those solutions through networking to the cluster.
Interacting constantly with the entrepreneurs and often drawn from the community is the network development agent.
Quite often the clusters that we work in are widely spread, either over few villages or over few industrial areas. In such cases, it's not feasible for a CDA to be in touch with the networks, with the SHGs, with the federations on a day-to-day basis. Quite often, people from the community, boys and girls from the community, are taken in as network development agents who look after these networks, these groups, handhold them in day-to-day decisions and find solutions to critical bottlenecks.
Effective cluster development agents and network development agents can set into motion an important process of change. In the stone carvers cluster, for instance, around 200 artisans have been able to access credit of more than 75 lakh rupees. 150 household artisans have increased their incomes by 400 to 500 rupees per month. Similarly, 50 craft production units have increased their monthly profits by nearly 1,000 rupees. And availability of working capital has led to an increase of around 1.5 crore rupees in sales. Clearly, the seeds of change have been planted.